So I do want you to call whether you tried to get a test today. Were you a key worker who's displaying symptoms of the virus? Because that's who these tests are for. The government say if you haven't got the symptoms, it doesn't apply to you. I suspect some of the people, however, who logged onto that website, the 16,000 tests had gone in 3 minutes, may have been people who in fact don't have the symptoms. Government has to be tough in making these choices. But how easy or difficult has it been for you to get a test? If you're a care worker, if you're a key worker in the NHS, police, emergency services, retail, are you going to try to get a test, particularly if you've been at home with symptoms? 0345 6060 973. But before we go back to the calls and that conversation about testing, you will have heard all about Donald Trump, the President of the United States, an extraordinary intervention in the coronavirus debate. He came forward with one or two ideas of his own, which he thought perhaps people might like to try in the battle to alleviate symptoms. I'm going to let LBC's Washington correspondent Simon Marks explain it all.
Am I a lucky guy or what? Andrew, the White House says we've taken all of this out of context. So let me put it all into the context in which this went down at last night's press briefing at the White House. And by the way, there'll be another one along in 2.5 hours' time, so strap yourselves in for that. President Trump invited a scientist from the Department of Homeland Security to come and present the conclusions of some preliminary, with the emphasis on the word preliminary, research that the Department of Homeland Security has done on the impact of sunlight on coronavirus. And the scientist presented the findings and explained that in direct sunlight, the virus, when it's on a hard surface, appears to last substantially less time than it does when it's not in direct sunlight. That was the gist of the scientific evidence that was presented during last night's news briefing. Again, preliminary research, none of it released to the broader scientific community. Impossible for anyone in that room last night to confirm the claims that were being made about the impact of sunlight on coronavirus. President Trump then engaged in a stream of consciousness riff. This was not resulting from a question by a member of the press. This was resulting in the presentation that the scientist from the Department of Homeland Security had just made. Here, in full, is what the president had to say.
So as well, a question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets in the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that, so that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
There it is, the president in context and suggesting, as you heard there, that perhaps injecting humans with disinfectant might be worthy of study by the scientific community. His chief health advisor, Dr. Deborah Birx, who heads the coronavirus task force at the White House, could be seen, and this is caught on camera, sitting at the side of the room, scarcely able to conceal her fury at what she was hearing from President Trump. As the words tumble from his mouth, she starts blinking furiously at a rate of knots and swallowing hard. The White House today says it's all the fault of the media. We've taken everything he had to say out of context. It was absolutely clear that he was encouraging Americans to take medical advice only from their doctors. That doesn't quite explain why the manufacturers of bleach and disinfectant here today have scrambled to put out new public health notices communicated through their social media channels and also on their websites, urging people not to drink, inject themselves, or in any way consume bleach or disinfectant as a possible cure for coronavirus. It also doesn't explain why President Trump offered this explanation of his comments last night during an event at the White House just a couple of hours ago.
I was asking a question sarcastically to reporters like you just to see what would happen. Now, disinfectant for doing this, maybe on the hands, would work. And I was asking the question of the gentleman who was there yesterday, Bill, because when they say that something will last 3 or 4 hours or 6 hours, but if the sun is out or if they use disinfectant, it goes away in less than a minute. Did you hear about this yesterday? But I was asking a very sarcastic question to the reporters in the room.
He was not asking the question sarcastically, and he wasn't asking it to reporters in the room. My children are no longer infants, but when they were, Andrew, they would have offered a more mature response than that from a president who has been caught with his hands firmly in the cookie jar. Up on Capitol Hill, Democrats can't quite believe their luck. Here's what Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, had to say today.
The president is asking people to inject Lysol into their lungs. Without science in our decision-making, we are not going to be on a very successful path.
That's Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Donald Trump, if you can bear it, and I'm not sure I can, will be back in the White House briefing room in about 2.5 hours' time. Doubtless there will be more hijinks and shenanigans tonight on a day when the death toll in the United States has passed 50,000, with well over 800,000 cases of coronavirus infections here. And remember that this is a president of the United States who has repeatedly insisted over the last couple of weeks that he believes the country is on course to contain the death toll at 65,000 or below. Well, we're now at 50,000. There is no way, tragically, that 65,000 number is attainable.
Can I just ask you one thing, Simon? The doctor, the eminent doctor who we've seen a lot on stage with him and the sidelines, Dr. Deborah Birx.
Yes.
Is there some debate now in America about whether she should have intervened there and then because it was so damaging? Some people may just think because he's the President of the United States, what he said has some significance. Has she been criticised for not saying anything? I mean, you could see from her facial reaction she was aghast.
Yes. Well, she's been criticised not just for last night. She's been criticised for doing things over the last week or so where at various moments she appears to have provided the president with a bit of an assist, as they would say in the world of American sports. At one point, he was decrying the numbers that China has offered up relating to the numbers of deaths and infections in China. And she clearly provided him with a bit of assistance as he was getting himself into some rhetorical difficulty on that, and she was criticised for that. She also refused to criticise the states of Florida, where the public beaches have been reopened, or the state of Georgia, where massage parlours and tattoo parlours have been allowed to reopen. She said she wasn't going to second guess what the governors and public health officials in those states have decided to do. So last night was another example, but I think far and away the most egregious example, and arguably as the president's top public health official, she should have stood up and made it very clear to the public that no, there was no case to be made for consuming disinfectant or injecting yourself with it. Look, I think that both Dr. Birx and Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institutes of Health, are in a truly invidious position here. They are committed professionals. They are experts in their respective fields. They want to do whatever they can to try and mitigate the risks of more deaths and a second wave of infections. And they clearly, behind the scenes, are dealing with a nightmare every single day as they try to persuade the president to take the actions that responsible leaders around the world are trying to take. Had she stood up, I think, and directly contradicted him, she would never have been seen inside the White House again. She'd be out. And at that point, what good does she do the public? I think it's a truly difficult decision, particularly those two officials have to make.
Might be a relief to be out of the White House, Simon.
Well, there is that.
All right, Simon, we might hear from you again later. Donald Trump, of course, doing yet another daily briefing in a couple of hours' time. Who's advising him? Oh, yeah, no one, because he doesn't take advice.